problem is, if you read about this, I mean, look, this is the most recent page. This is a lot of reading. Nobody, if you're a casual fan, nobody wants to do all this reading to learn about this when they can just enjoy the NBA casually, right? So that is the whole reason I'm making this video, is to explain the CBA in my own words and simplify it for those that more casual offense. And honestly, if you're like more into the league than most people, this still kind of helps you learn about what teams are thinking in the offseason. And the most important part of the CBA is how it affects teams both in the short term and the long term. Because in the past, so with the old CBA, you would see teams like a lot of guys would theorize on where players are going to go, right? It's still a common thing in the league. People want to know where these superstars, especially these disgruntled ones, are going to go and what team they're going to play for in the future. And they'll throw out names like, okay, like, years ago, you would hear Kevin Durant to the Warriors, of course, before it happened, which was insane. And then you hear about other names like, Damian Lillard to Miami, all this kind of stuff. And in the past, really anything was possible, trade wise or free agency wise. In the new NBA, the reason they have the CBA is to kind of limit those possibilities that are like as insane. Because if a team already has so much money committed to their core, in the past, you could pay really as much as you wanted to make a winning team and you wouldn't have that much penalty. That is the whole purpose of this new CBA, is to penalize those teams that are willing to pay like any amount of money to try and win. And it's made to give smaller market teams an advantage both in the short term and the long term. And if you look at the NBA right now, the two teams that are probably going to the finals are the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Indiana Pacers. So far for the league, it's working. Whether or not fans like it or not, that's a different thing. But it's going to be more important to learn about for the coming years. So what I have is I'm literally just going to write out on these notes everything that you really need to know about the NBA CBA. The first thing is this new NBA. It started in the off season of the 2023 season. I believe it was July of 2023, and it will go through the 2029 to the 2030 NBA season before the league re-votes on it. So for the next 5-6 seasons, this is what the league is going to be like. And so there are a couple of things that are like the most important to know about. So contract extensions for players. In the past, if you were re-signing with your same team, right? So say you're a free agent, say Jalen Brunson a few years ago, right? You were on the Dallas Mavericks and you were becoming a free agent. Say Jalen Brunson wasn't making this, but say he was making $100 million on his contract with the Dallas Mavericks. What the Mavericks could offer was an 120% raise at the time. So he could go up to $120 million by re-signing with them, which gives that team an advantage because the money at the time would be more than what you would sign elsewhere. The problem was it wasn't viewed as a big difference around the league. Like, unless you really want to be playing for that team and you're willing to sacrifice a little bit extra money to keep playing with the team, then you would be better off going to a team you would have a better chance of winning for and just making a little bit less. But they changed that financial to 140%. So, and that was for the current team the player played for. So now it's the same way with the other guys. So if there's any free agent hitting the market this year, they can still make more money by re-signing with their team if that team chooses to sign them for that amount of money, right? And the big thing that this does is it makes free agency less volatile, right? Overall, it doesn't give free agency as much of a purpose as it used to. And that is why we don't hear a lot about big name players hitting the market anymore. The reason I use Jalen Brunson as an example is because that's really the last big free agency signing the league has had because of this new CBA. Brunson's been on the Knicks for, I think this is his third season, if I remember right. And I mean, there's been some big names that signed elsewhere, right? Like Paul George last year signed to Philadelphia, but Paul George is like 36 years old. He's not the Paul George of old, so it's not that big of a deal. And that's what kind of affects teams that, are kind of in that middle land. A lot of times, teams that are kind of in that middle area where you're not a contender, but you know, you're not going to be picking high in the draft, you would look to free agency more often than not to kind of push your team over. And that's what teams like the Miami Heat would do to push themselves into contention. We would see the Warriors do that, obviously with Kevin Durant, and then they signed like D'Angelo Russell a couple of years ago. That method isn't as relevant as it used to be because of this. So that's the biggest effect it has with like this whole contract extension thing. Teams are kind of, or players, I should say, are kind of encouraged to re-sign with the team that drafted them, which is fine. Honestly, I don't see a problem with that. It's just the fact that if they want just money and they don't really want anything else, then they're going to get that from the team that drafted them, more likely than not. And then the really big part about the CBA is something that I think a lot of people, especially if you're kind of casual fans of the league, you've already heard about this. And that's called the first apron and the second apron. What these did was they were made to punish teams for paying into the luxury tax. The NBA has like a luxury tax system, and if you're over that luxury tax, you have to pay a little more money every year to keep that team together. Now, in the past in the NBA, so many teams are in this because besides paying money, you didn't really have any other penalty, right? And if your ownership has money, is willing to pay a lot of money, and you have a good basketball team and you're winning championships, then okay, who cares, right? Unless you're in it for like a long period of time, the it wasn't really you win some, you lose some. It was really you win a lot more than you lose with that scenario. Like with the Warriors, they signed Kevin Durant, and it was a big deal because people are like, man, this team's gonna have to pay so much money to keep these guys on a team, right? But Golden State was like, okay, whatever. Like, we don't care. We're gonna win multiple championships. We're gonna make a ton of money, and we're gonna have a dynasty. So as long as your owner is willing to pay a little more, it didn't matter. But now in the NBA, probably because of that Golden State Warriors team, they put these aprons into place to punish those teams that are paying into this luxury tax and making it more difficult for your team, both in the short term and the long term, to contend. This is where it starts getting important. The luxury tax this season was $170 million, right? So if you're paying 170 or more, you are paying taxes to keep your team together. And then this is where it gets really important for teams both in the present and going forward. So you have two aprons. The first apron, which for this year was 178 million. And you have the second apron, which is a little bit higher at 188 million. Now, what's important to understand is the restrictions that come with being in both the first apron and the second apron. So, with the first apron, you have some restrictions, but they're really not that insane. Like, you can still have a pretty good bit of flexibility with your team, and as long as you're like a winning team, like you're a playoff contender, or you're even a championship contender, or you're a piece away, then you can get away with this and you don't really have to worry about the long term or anything like that. You can't send money in trades. This isn't something we see a lot of. In the NFL, you see it a lot. In the NBA, you don't really. Like, sometimes they call it cash considerations, in the NBA. You'll see it every now and then, especially in like draft pick trades or like a smaller player. But this is another feature. And one of the big ones is the fact that you don't have the non taxpayer MLE. This one is important because so a lot of teams that are under the apron, they can push themselves to this number, right? Like right around like 169 million and go all the way up to there, which is a lot of money to commit to your roster. And then you can use this mid-level exception, which is can be a 1, 2, or 3 year deal that is valued at $12.5 million. So that's a pretty good role player if you can find a guy that you want to pay that. So that's kind of a big loss. Like a lot of teams will kind of push that line, that threshold, and then to end their off season, they might use the non-taxpayer MLE to get another role player on their team to help them win more games in the future. And then another big one is you cannot have a sign and trade. And by incoming, I mean you can't bring in a player as a result of sign and trade. So a guy like Jonathan Kuminga will be more than likely sign and trade this offseason. He is a restricted free agent for the Golden State Warriors. He's a younger guy. They probably want to keep him, but if they don't, they're going to do a sign and trade. And if you're a first apron team, you can't receive that player in the sign and trade unless you get out of the first apron before making that trade. So that does limit the freedom of Golden State in making that trade, as well as any team that wants to make a trade to land Jonathan Kuminga. And really all that means is so aggregating trades is putting players together to match a salary of another player. So let's say, for example, like Luka Doncic came available in a trade, right? Because that would never happen, right? Now, if he was available in a trade, he his salary is pretty big. It's like $50 million. If you wanted to trade for a player like him and you needed salaries to match, you can't do that. So say you're like the Phoenix Suns or something like that, right? And you wanted to get Luka Doncic. You're a first apron team. You can't combine salaries of guys like Grayson Allen and like Devin Booker to match salaries to get the trade done. You basically would have to do a 1-and-1 trade. So it'd have to be like a Kevin Durant and you'd probably have to throw in like a draft pick or something to get it done. It just makes trades for higher end guys more difficult. So those are the first apron restrictions, which, I mean, obviously they're pretty big, right? You definitely have limited freedom, which in the old NBA, you didn't have that as a result of building these dynasties and like these really strong attending teams. But in the new NBA, this is what you're facing with. So for the second apron, you have no mid-level exceptions. And so what that means is, so the non-taxpayer mid-level exception right here, as you guys can see, you can pay a guy $12.5 million per year as long as you don't go over that line, right? And even in the first apron, you still have access to some exceptions. They're lower end ones where it's like 5, 6, maybe $7 million, but you still have access to some. In the second apron, you don't have any. So you don't have any like get out of jail free cards basically to sign players because you're paying so much money to your current roster. The second one is no sign and trades at all. You can't receive a player in a sign and trade. You can't send a player out in a sign and trade. So if you have a big name going to free agency and you want to try and get something for him instead of nothing, you can't work out a sign and trade. You cannot take more money in trades, which basically means even if you're sending a team like $50 million, right, and you're only receiving like, say you're receiving 51 million and not like anything more than that, you still can't do that trade because you're in the second apron. You have to take back less money than you're sending out no matter what. And then the last one, which not a lot of people know about or talk about, which is honestly really significant, is the fact that you can lose your future first round picks if you are in the apron for multiple years. So the exact terminology is this. So to make it super clear, you don't lose your pick, but say, okay, so if you're in the first apron for 3 out of 5 years, it doesn't even have to be consecutive, just any 3 out of 5 year stretch, you will lose your first round pick. So it's 2025 right now. Let's say there's a team that makes this mistake this year. Your first round pick from the year 2032 will automatically be moved to the back of the draft. And you can still trade that pick away, but you still face that problem where that pick, no matter what, is going to be locked in at 30, the last pick. And there are teams, this is the third year this has been in place. There are already teams that face this problem this offseason, which we will get into those teams eventually. Really, what it does is if you want to build a contending team and you go all in trading your picks away to get high end guys, you better be sure that you can win with that team. Because if not, you're going to have to blow it all up, trade these guys for picks, and try and do it again. Or you can trade away if you're a middle of the pack team, you can trade away your picks or your players for picks and then try and build that way. This is why you see teams like Oklahoma City doing so well right now. Obviously, you have Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, right? But people forget that in that trade, you got Shea Gilgeous and you got multiple draft picks, one of which was J-Dub, Jalen Williams. They have Jalen Williams and they have Chet on rookie deals right now. They'll be due for an extension, but they're not paying any aprons. They're not going to be for at least a year. And you have good contracts like the Hartenstein contract is like 20 mil a year, which is a good bit, but you can live with it. And the Caruso contract is also around that number. So you're not paying a lot of money to your high end guys, and that's why teams like that are doing so well and will do well. That is how you win in this new NBA.